Today we are going to discuss question 1. This is the first question in CKA exam question series. We have 30 plus questions, very well designed to make you have a feel of actual exam questions, very to the point questions, and explained step by step. The questions which I am going to discuss in this YouTube video is also explained in the blog, so you can follow the blog and the video together, or if you want to give a try, you are stuck at somewhere, you can follow this video. Okay, before we start, if you are new to this channel, please consider subscribing it. Some part of the video or some part of this exam series might not be available for everyone. It is only available for YouTube subscriber. So please consider subscribing and also click on the bell icon so that whenever I release a new video, you are being notified. So let's start the first question. The question is, this question is based on service account, cluster role, and cluster role binding. So the question is, create a new cluster role named demo cluster role in demo namespace. Any resources associated with the cluster role should be able to create following resources: deployment, StatefulSet, daemon set. Create a service account named demo token and bind service cluster role with the service account. Okay, you can also see on the blogs there is a small voting. You can also vote and express your views. If you see the result, around 50% of the audience like you, they have voted and they said yeah, they got a very similar question in their exam. Some 8% they have voted no, they did not get similar question in their exam, and many of us, they have not appeared for the exam yet, but they felt this video is helpful, this question was helpful to them. So you can also express your opinion, and let's start. Let's check the solution. So if you want to give a try, pause this video, give a try at your end, and if you are stuck, then resume the video and see the remaining section of this video course. On this blog, there is also a timer. If you want to give it a try, start the timer. Try to attempt with your best effort to make this question, to solve this question within 5 minutes. Moment you are done, stop the timer and see if you are able to achieve that question, you are able to solve within 5 minutes or not. Okay, so in order to solve this question, as per the question, the very first step is create a demo namespace. In your real exam, the namespace might already exist, but since you are practicing it on locally on your system, the first step is create a namespace. Here I have mentioned demo namespace. There might be a CKA namespace, or it can be anything. So make sure you if the namespace is not created, create the namespace, but 99% chances they will have the namespace. Okay, so just you directly create required resources. So once the namespace is created in the step first, next step is create the service account. So service account, use imperative command to create service account. So the command is kubectl create service account, and then the name of the service account. So as per the question, the name of the service account should be demo token. Okay, so create the service account, and service account is scoped under namespace. Okay, so mention the namespace which is mentioned in the question, that is demo namespace. You can copy the same command here and execute it on your terminal if you are stuck, so that you can create a service account. Next step is create a cluster rule. So cluster rules are cluster wide. If you just give kubectl get cluster role, then you might find on a default cluster, you might find more than 50 or 100 roles are available. So there are so many roles comes by default when we set up a Kubernetes cluster, and these roles are available within the cluster to any service account. They can use this role. So here in this question we are going to create a new cluster role. Okay, and to create a cluster role the commands are very straightforward. Kubectl create cluster role, and at the time of creating cluster role we are also going to assign the resources. Okay, so deployments, stateful sets and daemon sets, these resources are added inside the role. So when we create a role we are assigning so if I try to explain what is role is, like it's kind of a access group we are creating, and in that we are trying to attach certain resources where that role can have access. So beyond this deployment, stateful sets and daemon set, if you are using this role you might not be able to perform the action, and what action you can perform, that is defined under verb. Okay, so here I am going to give the action which this role can perform is create, and it can create resources like deployment sets, stateful sets, daemon sets. Okay, again using this role you can only create, you cannot delete, because if you want to give that delete then also you can mention here delete, create, delete. So at this, as per this question, we only need to assign verb create, and make sure that you only mention the verb which is mentioned in the question. Do not try to add extra verbs. If you have practice and the moment you saw the question in exam and you try to do something extra, please don't do that. Okay, there is a small note here. The cluster role and cluster role bindings are created at cluster level, not at the namespace level. So please check this. Now once the cluster role is created, okay, so kubectl describe cluster role. We just now created cluster role, right? Here the demo cluster role created. Once you have created cluster role, describe it to see that what this cluster role your what you were targeting the cluster role has. One moment. So here if we describe this cluster role, you see that the resources which are mentioned in the questions is there in that or not, whether the cluster role has created properly. So you will see all these resources which is there as per the question are listed under the resource, and the verb is create. Okay, so exactly it's matching as per the requirement. Do all these things very quickly in the exam. Create, describe, make sure it is as per the question, and move on to the next step. Okay, so we created service account. So service account is like a user who will use the role. Okay, now but the service account is a separate Kubernetes object. Cluster role binding which we created is a separate Kubernetes object. Both this service account and cluster role don't know about each other. Now using this role binding we are going to bind this service account. Okay, which is if in a normal if in a general term, if I say service account is like a user who will log into your system, and the cluster role is like the policy and the access once the user log in, what he can do. So user is separate object right now, and cluster role is a separate. Using this binding we are going to bind these together. Okay, so create cluster role binding, demo cluster role binding. This is the name. I think this is the name given in the question. If it is not, no, there is no name defined here in the question, so you can choose any name, whatever name you want, if the question has not given the name for the cluster role binding. So I have taken demo cluster role binding as a name. You can take ABCD, whatever you want, and the command is kubectl create cluster role binding, and then give the name of the role binding. After that define the binding components now. So the first part is cluster role. So it is going to bind this cluster role, demo cluster role, and service account, this demo namespace, demo token. So always namespace, when we define a service account, then before that we have to mention namespace in which that service account is. So here this cluster role binding, demo cluster role binding, is going to bind this cluster role with this namespace. Okay, so now sorry, this service account. So once you execute this command, you will see that cluster role binding is created. Demo cluster role binding is created, right? Now, so we have, as per the question, if we see the, we have created namespace, we have created service account, and we have created cluster role and cluster role binding. Now the time has come to validate. So if you get this question, you can try to execute all these commands, similar commands in your exam, and try to achieve it within 5 minutes. It is very much possible. You can do it in a couple of minutes itself, but don't forget to validate it at the end. So to validate, its command is very simple: kubectl auth can I. So this is a standard you can practice. When you practice this, is the kubectl auth can I. This is the first part, and after that you mention what verb you mentioned in your while you were creating cluster role, what verb you mentioned. So we mentioned create, and what was the resource where this service account can create. So service account has been given resources which were mentioned in the cluster role was deployment, then give a namespace, name demo namespace, okay, and as service account. So what we are actually trying to check here, that the service account which you have created, whether that service account using the cluster role which we created, will it be able to create deployment set or not, or will it be create deployment or not. So here if you see here, as, so system is going to execute the command create a deployment under this namespace, assuming that you are right now as demo token service account. Okay, so this command is checking if demo token under demo namespace can create deployment in demo namespace or not. If you get an answer yes, that means you have achieved what was expected from you in the exam. Okay, so you have created service account exactly in the same way. Similarly, we can check, assuming that you are demo token using, assuming that the service account demo token can create daemon set in namespace demo namespace or not. So you can execute the same command kubectl auth can I create deployment in demo namespace, assuming the user is service demo token service account under demo namespace. Okay, so this demo token service account is created inside demo namespace only. So this service account cannot create, if you try to change here the namespace here, demo namespace, try to give any other namespace, cube system or any namespace which you have created, your answer here instead of yes, it will be no. It should come no. So you can also give a negative check one. So like if you see at the end I have given a negative check. So kubectl auth can I create role, can I create rule hyphen. So here instead of create daemon set, I have given a rule. Like there are a number of Kubernetes objects which can be created, deleted, listed. Okay, so previously I was giving StatefulSet, daemon set, and deployment as per the rules, as per the resources which we had added in the question. This time I'm trying to give something different which we have not defined inside the cluster role which we created. Okay, so this is role. can I create role, okay, under demo namespace, and assuming that I am demo token service account? The response came as no, you cannot, because the cluster role has access only to create, and creating of what? Daemon set, stateful set, and deployment. Okay, so if you are able to reproduce this kind of result at the end, then you can very confidently say that this was helpful. You have achieved your goal, and you can move to the next question. This entire process can be completed within 2 to 3 minutes, and if you are taking time around 5 to 6 minutes, then practice it over and over again, and try to speed up yourself. Try to increase your speed to complete this question within a couple of minutes. Okay, so hope you would have liked it. Please leave us your comment, and like, share this video. Let us know if you felt that there should be something extra enhancement or changes in this video on this blog. If you are new to DevOps Titan website, please consider checking it. We update the post every week, so you will have a couple of new posts every week. Under CKA practice question, you will be able to see all the questions, sample questions. Here we have 1 to 30 questions, so please try to go through it. Some questions might be restricted, which everyone might not be able to view, so please consider subscribing so that you get access to all the questions. So questions are free, but some questions are restricted only for the channel subscriber, so please subscribe so that you can have access to all the questions. Today we have come here to discuss the second question, CKA practice question 2, and the question is based on network policy and Ingress. Here in this example, I have taken a scenario where there are 3 pods. Okay, the name of the pod is Nginx, BusyBox1, BusyBox2. So the question requirement is to create 3 pod name and their image name is given below. Make sure only BusyBox1 pod should be able to communicate with Nginx pod on port 80. Pod BusyBox2 should not be able to connect to pod Nginx. So basically there is no namespace defined here. So it looks like there are 3 pods, and within the same, if the in exam, if namespace is not defined, then all the pods are assumed to be within the same namespace. That is the default namespace. Okay, so by default, if you create a pod, the pod will connect. You can connect to Nginx pod, and if you try to telnet or if you try to ping, it will ping to other pods. But if you apply a network policy, if you don't want some pods to be able to communicate with other pods, then that's where network policy comes into the picture. So here there are 3 pods, all the pods are in default namespace, and here the question wants you to create a network policy and apply it to Nginx, and apply it in such a way that pod BusyBox2 should not be able to connect to pod Nginx. That means only BusyBox1 should be able to connect to pod Nginx on port 80. Okay, so let's see. As per this question requirement, if you get a question of this standard, and you might expect a question on this topic, and if at all you get a question on this platform or this standard, then you should be able to complete that question within 5 minutes, and practice as much you can, and try to complete such kind of question within 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, so there is a stopwatch. You can click on start, and you can click start, and once you are done, moment you are done, click on stop and check how much time it takes. There was a survey on this page, and many of you have voted. If you see the result, 64% people who has voted, maybe not everyone participates in the voting, but all those who have voted, they have selected. 64% said yes, they got a very similar question in their exam. And majority other second 29% people, they have said that they have not yet written exam, and they found this post is helpful to them. There's a small note I try to write. So okay, if you have not set up a cluster to practice for this lab, then here is the link for Windows user, and if you are on Mac, click on this link. You will get a YouTube video where I have shown step by step how you can create a cluster to practice. So let's assume, I assume that you have a cluster, and if you have a cluster, then first step is, if you get this question in the exam, most probably I assume you will have pod created. The exam in exams question, the examiner wants you to showcase how you create network policy. Pods might be there already, and you will be asked to create a policy, network policy. But in our lab exam, since we don't have a pod, you can copy all these commands: kubectl run image, run nginx image. So you try to execute these three commands and get the pods created. You see all these pods are in default namespace. And if you try, these pods are, make sure these pods are up and running. If you try to connect to any one of these pods, suppose if you exec connects to busybox1, and from there, if you just give ping nginx, okay, you will see the ping is working, or telnet on port 80, you will see it is getting connected. But as per the exam questions requirement, if you connect to busybox2 and try to telnet nginx on port 80, you will be able to connect right now, but the question wants you to restrict that. Apply a network policy so that if you connect to busybox2 pod, if you get inside the pod, and from there if you try to connect to nginx on port 80, your connection should be timed out or should be restricted. Okay, and this is the question where we want to implement this. Okay, step 2. So the requirement in the exam would be to create a network policy, and this is the network policy which we need to create. Now in network policy, these are the standard like API version, kind, metadata, spec. So here we have implemented pod selector and match labels. If you looks like I have not shown that or what. Okay, so when you create a pod, nginx pod, suppose if you are kubectl get pods, if you do, you see all these three pods are running. Run that command kubectl get pod space hyphen show levels. If you give that, then you will see the levels on all these three pods. Okay, by default the level of the pod which comes is run equal to the name of the pod. So by default this is the level which will be there on any pod you create. So here we have to apply, as per this question, we need to create a network policy, and the network policy should be applied on pod which has level run equal to nginx. Means we are going to apply network policy on nginx pod, and what inside that policy, what we need to write, that section will be defined here. So this section which you see, pod selector, this section defines which, once you create this policy, it will go and find the pod which has this level. Okay, and it will apply this network policy on that pod. And which pod has this level? By default I said run is the level name. By default, whenever you create any pod, that is the level by default, and the value of that level will be the name of the pod. Okay, so this policy which we are creating, it will go and search for the pod which has level run equal to nginx. Okay, and it will apply that policy on nginx. And what it is going to apply in this policy, we just have ingress. Okay, so what happens, we don't have egress here applied, we just have ingress. And in this ingress means anything which comes in. Okay, the request which comes in, that is called ingress. And by default, if you apply a policy, network policy to pod, it will deny the incoming request. Okay, if you want to whitelist, if you want to allow some request to come in, then you need to explicitly define it. So I have created one. We need to create one ingress under ingress under policy type. We need to whitelist one of the pod for one pod, like busybox2 as per the question. Busybox1 should be able to connect. So we need to define in the pod that you reject all the requests from wherever the request is coming. Reject all except from one pod. Okay, and how to define that? That piece of information is mentioned here. Okay, so it says ingress from, again it is here the pod selector. Select a pod which has level run equal to busybox1. So the pod which has this level, let that pod to send request to me on port 80. So if this pod busybox1, by default, as I said, each pod will have a default level run equal to name of the whatever is the name of the pod. So this will be the level on busybox1 pod. So the ingress policy which I have applied, it will always check if the request is coming from a pod which has this level, and if the request is coming for port 80, then accept that request. Okay, we are going to apply this policy. Once you create this policy, let's see, here we have created it. Okay, once you create this policy, here I am trying to describe, to showcase what this policy. Suppose if you have created any policy which your team member has created, and if you want to know what this policy is for, then this is a way you can describe the policy and see what this policy says. So this policy says allow ingress traffic to port 80 and from pod which has this level run equal to busybox1. Okay, it's time to validate the change, and if you now connect to busybox1, okay, and then this is the command through which if you can connect to pod, and hyphen, there are two hyphens here, and after this whatever command, whatever you will write here, that will go and execute inside that pod. Okay, so here we are trying to connect telnet on port here. So, and this port is nginx port. Okay, looks like I should have given one more here, like kubectl get pod -o wide, so that it would have listed IP address also of all these pods. That is missing in this post. So you need to put here whatever is the IP address of your nginx. Okay, so nginx pod, give the IP address of that nginx pod and space 80. Okay, so this is the port. So now using this command, we are trying to connect to busybox from busybox1. We are trying to telnet nginx pod on port 80, and you see the message is connected. If the same thing, if we do it for busybox2, then it says connection timed out, because it by default your busybox2 will keep trying to connect to nginx pod on port 80, and after a certain time period it will give connection timed out. And this is what our desired goal was. Okay, so I hope you would have liked it. In this CKA practice exam, there are total 33 questions. Some questions might not be visible to you or may not be accessible to you if you are not able to find those questions, or you are able to find only 13, 14 or 15 or 20 questions on my blog or on YouTube channel. Then might be some questions are restricted to only those members who are who are subscribers of DevOps Titan YouTube channel, or they have created an account on DevOps Titan website. So the website account creation and subscribing to YouTube channel, everything is free, but there is some kind of accountability to see how many users are connected with our YouTube channels and website. So that's why this small restriction is there, but all the contents are free. So if you have not subscribed, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. also comment what you like, what you don't like. If there is any improvement you want me to make, please suggest that. Please participate in this all the votings which is available on the site, so that it will be helpful for others to consider it. If it is not useful, then give it mention that no, it is not, you do not get a question or something. This is one section. If you got this question or you want to give a hint, yeah, similar question came in the exam, then give it a yes. So with this, let's conclude this video. I hope you would have liked it. Thank you very much. I will come up with third question, CK practice question third. So link you can find in the description of this video. We are going to discuss on question 3 under CKA Kubernetes exam series. There would be more than 30 plus questions as of mid of 2022. The number of questions will keep increasing as and when we receive feedback from the users like you. So please leave us a comment if you see that questions are not up to the exam standards, or if you have some question and you want us to create a video and blog on that, please let me know. I will create a blog for you. Also, if there are, as I said, there are 30 plus questions on this blog. If at all you are not able to view those 30 plus questions, only 10 or 15 questions are visible to you, that means you have access is restricted for you, and you need to create an account on DevOps Titan and fulfill those survey questions which will pop up to your email account or under your account on DevOps Titan site. So please create a free account. Everything is free, but you need to participate in some survey in order to get access to all the questions for CK practice questions. Okay. As of now, the voting which you see on the site is around 20 users have voted, because this site is very new, less than couple of weeks right now. So as and when, it depends when you are watching it, the number of voters, if you participate more, this will go up. But based on couple of weeks of review, if we see the result, 55% users, they have expressed the view that yeah, they wrote exam and they found a very similar question in the exam. I have written the exam, and all these questions are designed keeping CK exam standard in mind. Okay, so if you are getting these type of questions, the most probably the percentage of these questions would be 4%, the weightage if I talk about. And you should try to finish this question within 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so let's start without further delay. Click on check now. If you are on my blog, here there is a small timer. So before you start the question, try to click on start so that the timer will start, and then you start practicing. Once it is done, click on stop. If you don't have a lab environment ready for you to practice, then click on Windows. If you are using a window, then click on Windows, and you will have a YouTube video where I have explained step by step how to set up a Kubernetes cluster. Similarly, for Mac users, please check out this. Here I have mentioned some mistakes to avoid during CK exam. And in this blog, this is one of the very common mistake which most of the students they make it, and I'm going to discuss about it in a separate video, not in this. This is a separate topic and a very important topic. So if you have not watched it, then please watch that video also. So let's jump on the solution. First step is create a namespace CK exam as per the question. During the exam, in the actual exam, if you are getting this question, all examiner wants to know, all that examiner is trying to see whether you understand how to define resources within a YAML file. Okay, so most probably you will have a namespace already created. Since we in our lab environment, you might not have this namespace created, so run this command kubectl create ns demo namespace. It will create that namespace. Okay, here you see the question is CK namespace, and I have created demo namespace, so there is a small conflict. So please follow what is given in the question. If it is CK namespace, I should have created CK namespace. So here there is small mistake. I will get that corrected. Okay, so as per this question, we need to define a resource, CPU and memory in the pod YAML file. So get a pod YAML file from Kubernetes documentation. You will find so many examples. Get a YAML file. It's a simple YAML file, and under resources, just below under container where we define the name and the image, add one more line, resources limits. Under resources limits CPU and memory. Again, as I said, get a YAML file from Kubernetes documentation side. If you are writing exam, you should not refer to copy these information from the Kubernetes documentation. These things should be on your fingertips. Okay, that you just need to rather than, or you can generate a YAML file by dry run command. You can use that dry run command to generate an YAML file, and you should be very quick in defining these piece of code, okay, and run the YAML file. So you need to be very quick, and at least this much you need to remember. So I'm not trying to advocate that you should memorize all these things, but if you are going to work tomorrow as a DevOps, then this much basic concept we should have, okay, that creating a resource and then limits and how to define these things. So practice more, you will use to have these, okay, and then you create that YAML file pod, and that's it, done. So this question was, even if you get this question in the exam, it will be just for 4%, and you should be very quick to solve it within less than 2 minutes. Okay, so if you are taking more time, more than 2 minutes, then you need to practice more and more so that you reduce the time. Okay, and at the end, once you pod is created, make sure that pod is up and running before you move to the next question. So I hope you would have liked this video, and if you have any comment suggestion for me, please let us know, and I will make those corrections. Or if you have some suggestions for me to create some another blog post or YouTube videos, let me know. Thank you. Today we are here to discuss fourth question in the series of CK exam practice question. This series has more than 30 plus questions, and you can also find all these questions on my website devopstitan.com and under Kubernetes practice questions. So please visit on the site if you want to go through the website. In this video, I'm going to walk through this question. In case if you are not able to view all the 30 questions on the site, then that means access is restricted for you for a few questions. All you need to do is create a free account on the site and participate in the survey. So without further delay, let's start the question. As per this question, create a pod by name read-only pod using image Alpine. The process running inside pod should only have read-only access to the containers file system. Okay. Create a volume by name my volume and mount it at data inside container. The process running inside container should have read and write access on the mounted volume. Also run sleep 3600 inside container. So image name, pod name, mount path inside container, and the command to execute are given in this question. Access, the container file system should have read only access. The mounted volume should have write only access. So basically the CK, if you are practicing for Kubernetes CKA exam, basically this exam makes sure that if you are able to achieve a passing score, that means you have a good understanding on the Kubernetes fundamental. As if you're working as a DevOps engineer in an organization, there would be many time a requirement of similar type of very similar requirement what we are going to discuss in the question. Okay, so there might be a requirement where the developers, you as a DevOps admin, you are creating a pod, but you want that the developer or the code, because you don't know about the source code, what source code the developers are coming with, right? You don't want the developer or the code to make any changes inside the container file system. So the process which is owning that container, running inside the container, should not be able to make any changes in the container file system. That means inside a container there are root directory, there would be opt temp. So if someone tries to create a or delete any file system in that container, then the process then the user might not be able to create or delete any file system inside container. But if the process which is running, suppose you have as a DevOps, as a developer, you are building a code which you want to deploy on Tomcat, for example, and the Tomcat is running inside the container, the pod. Okay, as per your code, you generate log and you want to write that log inside opt directory. If you have this code which writes a new log when certain events are met, and it should generate a log file in /opt directory, then you will not be able to do that, because your process, the container, the pod, the process which is running inside the pod has only access on entire file system. Okay, so you will not be able to create a log file under opt. But as per this question, if the same user, if you modify your code and try to write the same log file inside /data instead of opt, inside opt, if you try to write inside data, then you will be allowed to write. So we are going to see that use case here in this question. Okay, so hope this overview, the explanation would have helped you what we are going to discuss it. So let's start. Click on check now and go through this solution which is provided for this question. If you are sure that you can now solve it, then pause this video, go through it, try to solve this question by your own. If you are stuck, then please continue, resume this video and YouTube and follow along. Okay, so there is a small timer here. When you are trying to start the question, click on start, and once you are done, then click on stop, and make sure the entire time should not be more than 5 minutes. There is a small survey here. If you see this survey, the users who wrote this exam, or those who are practicing for this question, they have participated in the survey, and this blog is less than couple of weeks, not more. So still we got some 23 response from the users. And if you see here the results, if you click on result, you will see that 30% users who have voted, they actually wrote the exam and they have voted that they receive a similar questions. 13% say they have not received a question similar to this in their exam, and 56% voted that they are still preparing for exam, but they found this blog or this post is very useful. So in CKA exam, there are multiple sets of questions which I believe, so they rotate their questions very frequently. So rather than trying to look for actual exam question, try to focus on understanding the concept. That will help. Whichever question exam has for you, you will be ready for it. Okay, so let's start. In my blog, for every question I have given some kind of tips, the mistakes which you should avoid. I will try to have a separate video for these mistakes. Probably you should try to go through these videos couple of days or week before actually when you are appearing for CKA exam. So you can ignore these notes here at the beginning. If you want, you can go through it. So the first step is create a YAML file for pod based on the question. Okay, so here if we go through the question, it says create an image, create a pod with read only pod with this name, taking image this. You need to define a mount path, so define a volume, and there's a directory you need to define inside container. Then when you are defining pod, you need to inside specification like the template, you need to define the command. Let's see that. I just wanted to refer the question once again before explaining the YAML file. So here if you see, these are the standard here. These are the standard template, API version, kind, metadata. So here I have defined a label, but this is not required in the question. So this is an additional field, a best practice to have some labels. If you don't want, this is an additional field, and if you don't have it, it doesn't matter. Okay, name is read only pod, that's good. Under containers, this is the image which the question wants you to use. This is the name of that pod which question wants us. The command, under command we will define the command which is required to have in the question. Then the security context. Okay, so in the security context, if we put this read only root file system true, if we have this, then by default once the pod is running, the pod file system will have read only access. So the user, whichever user owns the container, the process which is running inside the pod or container, will have read only access on the file system. Okay, and then as per the question, there's a volume mounts, and this volume is mounted under /data inside the container, and the name of the volume is my volume. Okay, and here I have defined that my volume is some temporary directory, so it is a local volume. So on your host, if you are Kubernetes cluster, if you are running this pod and this pod comes up on suppose node 1, then on node 1 there will be some temporary directory on the host machine which will store all the files which goes inside data, will be there inside that temporary directory on the physical machine on the node 1. For example, if the pod is running on node 1, and moment this pod is deleted, if you delete this pod, then that temporary directory will also go away. Okay, so since in this question they have not defined that on the host machine, on the host like node 1, worker node 1 or worker node 2, if they have not defined that you should store data inside some directory var etc log or some data, if they have not defined, then always use empty directory. Okay, if they have defined that on local system, you should store the files inside, all the files which is there in the /data should be stored under /temp on the local system. In that case, you need to define host path here and the path. Okay, so but since in this question it is not defined, so we'll go with this value. Okay, here there are some information which I have explained, same thing is in the write-up. Create this YAML file and make sure it is up and running. Once it is up and running, here are the command kubectl exec. So I'm trying to execute a command inside read only pod, and what I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to create a file system by touch command inside temp directory, and you see here it should get denied. So command terminated with exit code 1. Okay, and it says here the read only file system. So this /temp is a read only file system and you won't be able to execute it. Same command if we try to execute like the touch inside data, and you see we didn't get any error. Okay, so that means it got executed, and next time I'm trying to execute another command, and this time I'm trying to list all the files inside /data or inside read only pod, and it has listed this test.txt which we created in this step. Okay, so this shows that we are able to create a file system. We are able to create files or directory, or we have write access inside mount path, but not in on pod file systems. Okay, so this concludes this video. I hope you would have learned something, and practice on these questions multiple times. Try to solve it within couple of minutes, 2 to 3 4 minutes, but don't take beyond that. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing it. Let me know if you have any feedback for me. With this, goodbye, and see you again soon in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Today we are going to discuss on question number 5. This is the 5th question in a series of 30 plus questions for CKA practice exam. So please subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed, and also visit other questions. So in this question, we are going to create a pod by name pod add set time capabilities. Pod name can be anything, using the given image Alpine, and we are asked to add two capabilities here, systime and netadmin, to the container, and also to run a command that is sleep 3600. Set system time by executing command, and there is a command by which we can set the system time. Once the pod is up and running, check system time and store output under the given file. So basically in this question, you are being tested whether you know how to set, how to use capabilities inside container. Okay, so by default the container uh, has set of restricted capabilities. So the root user inside a container is not having the full capabilities which an actual root user on Linux server, when we work on the physical servers, they have. So the capabilities are very much restricted here, and that is because of various security reasons, and those are right. So if you want to add capabilities to the root user inside container to add, to make a change in the system time, then you need to add systime capabilities. So here in this question, you are being tested whether you know how to add capabilities or not. Okay, so let's move on to the answer. Here is a small survey kind of, where not too many users have participated. So around 7 users have voted for this, and we can see uh, it's kind of mixed response. This few of us have said yes, they got a similar question. Few they said they not, and majority they said they are yet to write exam. So vote, please vote, and let us know what you feel about it. If you have already written the exam, then vote according to that, yes, no. And if you have not, then the third option is for you. Okay, let's move to the answer. So try to solve this question within 5 minutes. There is a small timer here. Uh-oh, no. So looks like there is a small mix-up in the voting. So actual voting is reflecting here, and here we see a good response on this. So okay, so around 32% have said that they got similar questions in their exam. So yeah, to practice this question, we need lab environment. So if you don't have a working Kubernetes cluster, then here is the steps for Windows and here for Mac user. Uh, there are some tips which you can follow to avoid mistakes. I will have a separate video on this, so I'm skipping it for now, but please go through it, and until I am not making the video on that, but please, this is very important. Okay, so we'll jump on the solution. So step 1, let's, as per the question, create the pod with the given by the name which is mentioned in the question, and using Alpine image. Excuse me. The command in question, there is a requirement that we should execute sleep 36. So if you are asked to execute any command inside container, this is the exact syntax. Okay, follow it, and under replace sleep 3600 with whatever command given in the exam. Okay, to add any capabilities, we need to add security context. Just the way we add name image command, just below it security context, and under security context there is capability. So inside capability add, and then under this we can add multiple capabilities just by defining a comma, separating it by comma, and we can add multiple capabilities. So this is a simple YAML file, and if you are asked similar kind of question, don't waste much time giving checking out on Kubernetes documentation. These things are like you should have it on top of your mind. So please practice it multiple times, and the questions related to security context or adding capabilities, just very simple. You just need to add these lines, and this much should be in your mind moment you get a question on capabilities. Okay, so create a pod, and once you have created the pod, make sure the pod is up and running, and then you just execute the command connect to pod. So I'm connecting to this pod exec it. Okay, and I'm trying to check a date. Okay, so anything which we give after pod name double dots, and then if we whatever we write, that gets executed on inside pod, and we get an output on the terminal. So it says the time is 6:41. Okay, now this is the by default time. Okay, now here let's set the time in the container as per given question. So in the question it is asked to run a command to set a system time. Okay, so set system time by executing command. Okay, so we need to execute this command. If in a normal pod, if you are creating a pod on Nginx without adding system capabilities, and if you try to run this command, it will get permission will get denied, because that user which is trying to change the set the time inside your pod container is not having these capabilities. Okay, so by default those capabilities are restricted for the root user inside container. So since we have added these capabilities and created pod, we should be able to set time. So here, where it is that? Okay, so we are setting the time here, kubectl exec it, and it is the same command here. We had set um, a date. We check the date, and now we are trying to set. Okay, so here it is trying to set the command. We are trying to run the command here, the given command, and it gave the output that the previously the time was some 6:41 and the time is set to 16. And after that, after adding this set, if we execute the same command which we had executed on before, we are getting the expected output. Now it is April 10:16. Okay, so you see the time, it was 6, now it is 16, so the time has changed. Okay, so we need to execute this command, and we have validated. So this was our question requirement. The above screenshot shows the time is set as per the question. As per the question, we should redirect the output to this text file. Okay, this is the last part, don't forget. So try to execute the command once again and redirect it to text file which is mentioned here. So I am giving echo and then executing the command once again, the entire command. Okay, and here it is getting redirected to the file which is mentioned in the question. And make sure once you do it, try to cat the file, check what is the content inside that file. Okay, so this was very quick and uh, question. And if you get a question on this topic, uh, it should be like 4% or 5% weightage. So they just trying to check your skills on setting the time, whether you know or not. And so you should be able to do this. We are discussing question number 6. It's a sixth question in the series of 30 plus CKA practice exam questions. So if you have not subscribed and have watched other videos, please subscribe, and also please click on bell icon so that you get notified whenever the next video is released. And this question, this is a very important topic, and from CKA exam question perspective, and you may expect a question based on very similar topic. So let's get started. So the question is, add sidecar container to read logs from the main container. Okay, so basically you are asked here to create a pod, okay, with multiple containers. The pod image and other criterias are defined here, that um, this is the first container. The name of the container should be main. The image name is busybox, and the busybox version is given. They have defined the argument which you need to pass inside that container. Basically, it's a command. Okay. Um, then there is a volume mount. You need to mount this volume inside your container, and the volume mount name is main volume. Okay. Uh, it can be anything, so it may depends upon the question, what question has asked to create to you. Second container, then there is a similar information available for second container, and check the sidecar containers log and store its output under temp output.txt. Okay, so this is a very standard question, and if you are getting a sidecar container related question in your exam, most probably 99% this will meet the criteria and you will be able to solve. So practice this question couple of times if you are new to sidecar container, and hopefully you will be able to solve this question. If you get this question on sidecar, the weightage will be around 5 to 7%. So it really carries a good amount of score in exam. And okay, so let's start checking the solution, and we'll discuss more there. So let's click on check now. So before we deep dive, I would like to give a small information for all those visitors who are not aware of what's uh, sidecar container, because this is also one of the important topic if you are preparing for your interview. So typically a pod in Kubernetes contains one container, but it is possible visiting this blog. They have not written the exam, and but they found this was helpful for them to build the concept. There is a video on the blog to create a lab environment. If you are using Windows, if you are using Mac, then click here. Mistakes not to repeat in exam, or not to mistakes to avoid is mentioned over here. I will create a separate video on this, but meanwhile you try to go through this. There is a detailed description on what not to do and what to do during this. Is a extra information tips for the exam. So please go on to my blog and click on CK practice question 6. Okay, and you can see that. Okay, so now let's jump on to the solution. So step first, take reference from the Kubernetes documentation and create a YAML file as per the given question. Okay, so here I said basically you can take a reference of any YAML file, a pod definition file from Kubernetes documentation page. So you might take an Nginx pod, you can find very easily that YAML file, and then modify that YAML file. replace the name as per the name given in the question. So in this question it is multi-container pod. Replace that name and have it multi-container pod name. Then the container name, if it is a main, and the image name, update it as per the given question in the exam. And whatever is given under args, just copy paste the entire thing. You need not to apply additional brain over there. So just copy paste the args which is given in the question. And volume mount is also defined here, and volume mount name, that is main volume, and the mount path is given in the question. Define it here. You will get multiple questions where you might have to use this volume mounts, so be very thorough and have practice, and you should be able to write this piece of code like volume mount. You should be knowing how to use it, so practice it enough so that these things are on your fingertips. Now here comes the sidecar. So even remember I was giving an example that you might get a question to add a sidecar container inside a pod. So you might, if you are getting that question, then open that sidecar kubectl edit pod -n, whichever namespace it is. Open that YAML file and then add additional sidecar container in that. Save it, and it should be up and running. But I will say don't do that. uh, Rather than try to export the YAML file by dry run command, which you know, get the YAML file of that existing pod which is up and running, and then add the sidecar container information. Okay, whatever the sidecar container information given in the question, add it. Delete the existing pod, because once if the pod is up and running, editing that pod, live pod, may not work. So you need to delete the pod, and using the YAML file with the updated YAML file, just recreate the pod and you should be good. Okay, so in this question you are asked to create a multi-container pod. So this pod is not already up and running, so you will create a YAML file like this. In exam, if the pod is you need to add, then already this piece of information will already be there. Okay, you need not to worry in exam. And so in exam they will not give you, it is very highly unlikely, 99% I'm sure, that then they will not ask you to create a multi-container pod. They will just want to test your skill whether you know how to add a sidecar container or not. So 99% I'm sure they will have a pod up and running, and when you dry run and export that pod YAML file, you will get this much. Okay, so base will already be ready for you. You will get all these configurations. Okay, it will already be there in that YAML file which you will export. All you need to do is add this piece of information, which is very simple: image, name, image, and argument. If so, this is that argument which will read the log file. Okay, and so from where it is reading inside var log. Var log. In this var log, there will be a CK exam log file. So it is trying to read that information. And here you see var log is I'm mounting it. So this sidecar container don't know what is var log, and inside this CK exam.log is coming actually from the main container. So main container is trying to generate, it's creating this log file, okay, inside var log. And this var log, this path is mounted here. So the main volume, this will be some temporary volume which we'll see. I would have added a piece of code for this. So this mounted volume which is on the host mount path, that at the host mount path there will be this file system is mounted. So whatever is there inside this file system will be available on host node host, that host path. So if it is like node 1, this pod is running on node 1, then on node 1 host, under some temporary directory, this file system, whatever is available under this file system, will be available on localhost node 1. Okay, for example, I'm saying. So here, when we are adding a sidecar container and we are mounting the same mount path, you see, main volume here. So again, if we are mounting it the same volume path, then whatever is available inside this volume path will also be available under this volume path. So this sidecar container, what it is trying, it is trying to read this file which is generated here. Okay, it is just trying to read this file. So in real world, what will happen, you will have a question, you will have a project, and where the application team will come up with their pod, and they want that all their log outputs should be available on Splunk or some other portal. Then you will have a log aggregator for that, where you export the log, you take the log from the main container and push it to the Splunk. So there are many use cases, similar use cases for sidecar. It is very important, and you will use it very frequently if you're working as a DevOps engineer. Okay, so here I was talking about the piece of information. So here it is volumes, and here we have defined the main volume, and the same main volume is used at both the places. And what this volume defines, it says that create a temporary directory at the runtime. When you execute this pod, create a temporary directory on the host path and mount that temporary directory inside both the containers. So if both containers are using the same mount name, like, then same local directory which is on the node, on your cluster 1, on your node 1, worker node 1, same mount directory will be mounted inside both the container, so that if one pod creates a file in that file system, on that mounted file system, other container will have access to that file. Okay, so this is the a simple YAML file which you need to create this multi-container pod. Once again, in exam, if you are asked to add sidecar container, then you just need to add this piece of information. Okay, so in exam it will be just hardly couple of minutes, so don't get confused. And create the pod once you have YAML file up and ready. Make sure the pods is up and running, and there's both the container inside the pod is up. Okay, once it is up, then try to check the logs of what sidecar container is printing. So you see here the sidecar container, it has an argument, it inside the sidecar container, it all the time trying to read. So tail hyphen n plus an f, so live, and it is trying to tail this log. So if you try to just see the log of this multi-container pod, and inside this pod, and just specifically I'm checking for sidecar container, so it is printing this information. Okay, so this is actually nothing but whatever here we are generating in the main container, whatever the output it is generating, so it is actually checking the date and some time it is generating here. Okay, so we are getting this output. So this is what is required as per the question. The question, if you see once again, and you need to, whatever you are getting the output here, you need to write that output in this file. So you are getting this output, right? You need to copy this, and whatever is the output, you need to copy that in that file, and that's it. That will complete your question. So basically in this question you are tested. Once again, I'm saying, I already repeated a couple of times, you should know how to add sidecar, and I'm sure by this time you already know it. Okay, so if you have liked this video, please click on like, give a thumbs up, subscribe it, and do not forget to click on bell icon so that you get notified whenever the next video is released. We are going to discuss question number 7. This is a 30 plus CKA exam question series, and I have created video for 6 other questions. This is the seventh one. If you have not yet subscribed and or if you have not yet watched those videos, please also go through it. The link I will try to mention in my description, but the easiest way is to go to DevOps Titan website, and on that website you can click on CK practice question and you will have all the question at one place. Some of you might not be able to see all 30 plus questions. Maybe you can only have access to 5 or 10 or 15. So there is a small survey. All you need to do is create an account, a free account on DevOps Titan, and participate in the survey to get access to all the questions. Okay, so let's, without further delay, let's start the question. So here the question number 7 is to create a pod and define customer. Okay, here not customer. Create a pod and define custom user ID and group. So here the customer will be rectified. That's a typo over here. So the question is create a pod called non-root pod using image Redis Alpine. Okay, and you need to set run as user and fs group. These two are the values. In question you are being tested whether you know how to use it or not. You have Kubernetes documentation, you can refer it, but practice it enough that you don't need to refer all these. So if I see the survey, how much people loved it and what they say talked about it. So here is a small result, you can see it. And these websites are very new right now. When you're watching it, maybe down the line, at the time of you watch this video, check the latest status of this voting on the site. So right now it is just less than couple of weeks old, this website is, and not too many users have visited, so the voting is not very accurate right now. So just to give you what is being tested in this question and what is run as a user, so you should be knowing it. So run as user is the UID to run, uh, the entry point of container process. So every container process will have some entry point, the image which we create based on Docker, for example. So there is something entry point. So that entry point triggers a process which will run inside that container. So this run as user will, this is the ID which will be which will own that process, which will be executed by entry point. Okay, so the user ID that runs the first process in the container is this user ID, which you will define run as user 1000 or 1100, whatever it is. Okay, so let's go and check the solution step by step. Oh, so looks like there is some kind of mistake in terms of voting. People, they vote more on the page when they understand the question rather than on the page where these questions, all questions are collectively given. So here there is a pretty much healthy amount of votings, and I see majority of they say that they got a question very similar to this in their exam. Okay, so pay a close attention because this seems a popular question. Okay, so here there is a mistakes to avoid. If you are using Mac, then usually we are so much used to use Control C and Control V, so that may not work in the exam. So for Windows user, you need to click on Command C to copy, Command V to paste. I will have a separate video on all the mistakes to be avoided, so no need to worry. But please go through this. This is a very useful piece of information and some hints given over here. So if we talk about the steps to follow, so first step is create a pod YAML as per given question. So we can create a YAML file, and you should be knowing it how to write a small YAML file. Either you dry run create a Nginx pod and use dry run to export a template based on Nginx and then update that YAML file according to the question. So that's how I do it. Quickly I will generate a YAML file and then will update it. So uh, name as per this given question is non-root pod, and in that specification here security context you need to define under spec. Okay, so secure here is the container, so either you can define inside container or security context. Here I have defined security context first and then the container. Usually you will be used to see containers tab first, so uh, if you want, you can start from the container, define pod name, image name, and once this section is container section is done, then just in parallel to the container create another entry context, security context, and inside security context you define run as user and fs group as per the given question. That's it, very simple YAML file. Create this YAML file and make sure it is up and running, and if you execute, if you just give a command id, so how to do this, kubectl exec it and then the name of the pod, and if you write this after that 2 dash dash, okay, and whatever you will type here that will be executed inside pod. So if you type id, it will give the id and the group id number. Okay, and this is what was given in the question. So in CK exam you will not be asked to create something very great or very complex. They just test your basic skills of understanding whether you have understood the concept, you are able to implement the simple requirement or not. So this was one of the example where, do you know how to trigger the entry point process or the main process inside container using custom ID and group ID. So if you know, this was that you will be able to do this, very simple, and hope you would have liked it. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. If you have some suggestion, please do let me know. Do not forget to click on the bell icon so that you get notified whenever the next video is released. Thank you. So we are going to discuss on question number 8. This is 8th question in a series of 30 plus CKA questions, practice questions for the exam. So let's get started. So today we are going to have create 3 pods, web server, app server, DB server. These are just names. Do not take its name as a literal that these are the server. This can be any name on the pod, and depending upon the use case you will be using it. So assume that there are 3 pods: web server, app server, DB server. The image is given and the namespace in which these pods are created, that is mentioned in the question. Okay, create a network policy by name CKA network policy to allow only one-way connection from the web server pod to app server and DB server. So your web server pod, that is a web server by name, that web server pod should be able to connect with app server and DB server, only one-way communication. So app server and DB server should not be able to connect. Okay, this is the requirement. You may have a very similar requirement in your exam also. Okay, so here we are going to learn how to apply a network policy to restrict communication one way or from any pod. If in the question it is asked to make that pod isolated from all other pods, then you need to do this. Okay, the app server is running on port TCP port 8080 and the DB server is running on TCP port 6379. So you need to configure your web server, create a network policy and apply it on web server in such a way that if we telnet, if we connect to web server inside, if we go inside the web server terminal, and if from there if we try to telnet app server on port 8080, the connection should be established. And same thing if we try to connect to DB server on port 6379, the connection should be established, but vice versa should not be true. So if we connect to DB server and try to telnet from their web server on port 80, the connection should get fused. Okay, so this is the requirement you need to do. Do you know like what is the default behavior if we don't apply um, these network policy? What will happen before it? Will um, DB server be able to connect to web server, or will app server be able to connect to web server? Not sure. Okay, let's get started. We'll see all these things. So here there is a small diagram where this is shown one-way communication. Your web server should be able to communicate with DB server. Your web server should be able to communicate with app server, and here with the DB server. Okay. So this is the requirement. The communication should be only one way. So there should not be a reverse traffic, and if someone tries, that traffic should get rejected. Okay. So let's start. So these things I have already explained in multiple videos. If you are creating lab environment for Windows, then use this link. If you are creating lab environment for Mac, then there is a video to create a Kubernetes cluster on Mac for this lab. So let's go, and as per step number 1, so since we are exercising this in lab environment, we will create these 3 namespaces, web, app, and DB, to create a lab environment first, and then we'll create these 3 pod as per the given question. Simple it is. kubectl run web server -n web, and the image name as per the given questions. Okay, so create this 3 pod. In the real exam, in CKA exam, you will already have these pods created. If you get a similar question, you will have the pods created under respective namespaces. All you need is to create a network policy and apply. Since this, since you are practicing it in your lab environment, which you have, which I have shown a video to create, how to create a lab environment, create the network policy and the pod so that you are ready to create YAML file for network policy and apply it. Okay, so here I am saying check the newly created network namespaces and pods, and also check the IP address assigned to newly created pods. Okay, so here I'm checking what are the levels on namespaces. So these are the levels by default. We are going to use these levels down the line, so you should check what are the levels on existing namespaces. Okay, then what are the levels on the pod? So kubectl get pod -n web. In web namespace, show levels. So in web namespace we have web server, and web server has a level run equal to web server. So there is a default level which comes on any pod which we create. So run equal to whatever the name of the pod. So here the name of the pod is web server, so this will be the default level on that pod. Similarly, for app server, the default level will be run equal to app server. For DB server, run equal to DB server. So we have taken a note of it. Also check IP address. We are going to use these IP address to connect and test the connectivity. So if you run kubectl get pod -n to get the pod under DB and -o wide, then it will generate a little bit more output result, and one of the result would be IP address, and all we need to take a note of this IP address. Okay, so for DB server this is the IP address, for web server this is the IP address, and for app server this is the IP address. Okay, so we will be using these IP address down the line. That's why I have taken a note of all it. Check connectivity between pods. So here you see by default here I am connected inside web server. The user is root, and from here if I am trying to connect to DB server, 6379 is the port number for DB server, and the port number of IP address of DB pod. And if we try to connect, yeah, we are able to get the page. This is a DB server, welcome to DevOps Titan. Okay, So from web server, I am able to connect to DB server, and here I came out from the web server. I ran an exit command. Here I am trying to connect to the DB server, and from DB server, if I try to give, if I try to run curl on web server on port 80, even from DB server, I am able to connect to web server. So inside Kubernetes cluster, pods can communicate within a cluster with each other. There is, to make pods communicate, we need not to apply a network policy. So in order to restrict connectivity, we will be applying that network policy. So now, before we start this lab, we saw that all pods are able to communicate. I have not taken an example of app server pod because the behavior would be same. So we have taken an example of web server. From web server, we are able to connect to DB server. From DB server, we are able to connect to web server. Okay. Now here comes the question, actual question. Create network policy as per the given question. In your exam, all you need to do is apply your skill and create a network policy as per the given question. Okay, so let's discuss about this. One moment. So here, this is the template. You can get a network policy template from Kubernetes documentation quickly, and then try to update that. So under metadata, give the name of the network policy as per the given question. If not, then you can define based on you. But in this question, there is a name defined web server network policy, and the web server network policy. Since we have to apply this network policy on web server, we need to define the namespace inside namespace where web server pod is running. Okay, so that is a web pod selector match label run equal to web server. So here the pod selector will select the pod which has this label run equal to web server. So as I said, this is a default label run, and the value of that label is the pod name. So this section, spec section, goes and find that pod for which this policy is being created. So whatever is mentioned in this section, it will go and filter out, search among all 100 pods which has this level, okay, inside this namespace, because this is being applied in web namespace. So we will have just one pod in this namespace and with this tag. Okay, so the policy type section defines what are the policies we are implementing. So we are implementing in this document, in this YAML file, egress and ingress. Okay, and ingress, I have not defined anything. So by default, if we apply a network policy to a pod, the default is it will restrict the access. Okay, it will restrict all the access. It will restrict, if we define ingress and egress in the policy type, it will go ahead and block all the incoming and outgoing connection for the pod which match with this level run equal to web server. If we have just this configuration, assume there is nothing below it, we just have this configuration, create the policy, it will block all the incoming and outgoing connection for the pod having run equal to web server level. Now we are writing egress, and we are defining, we are whitelisting, we are telling Kubernetes, okay, block all the traffic but allow which is mentioned under ingress. Okay, so please allow this particular topic traffic. So egress means incoming, sorry, egress means outgoing, so outgoing connection from web server pod. So allow, stop, restrict all the outgoing connections except this outgoing. And in this example, I have not defined any ingress policy, just like the way I have defined here egress. So ingress is not defined. That means by default, as I said, if we don't have this section defined, if we have just these two sections, it will restrict all. The egress one will restrict all outgoing connections, so no connection can be established from web server pod, and the ingress will make sure no other pod is able to connect to web server pod. And with this here egress, we are whitelisting the connections. And what we are whitelisting? We are whitelisting that we should be able to send request. Egress means the web server pod should be able to communicate to a pod which has level run equal to DB server. Okay, and under namespace this, under a namespace this. Okay, so this is the, here I am matching the namespace. This is the levels which we checked on the namespace, right? So here I am saying that let the connection from web server go out for pod which has this level, and under namespace where the level is this. Okay, same thing we'll do one more time. Okay, and on, okay, so it will let the connection go out to pod which is having this level under this namespace on port 80, on sorry, on port 6379. So web server pod can send a request to DB server under DB namespace on port 6379. So with this, only these combination is possible. Only web server will be able to send request to DB server pod in DB namespace on port 6379. So this I have whitelisted and have allowed for that pod. Okay, same thing we need to do it for app server. So let's allow web server pod to connect to a pod which has run equal to app server level defined on the pod under namespace where the level is app. Okay, on port 8080. So these are the two requests which, as per the given question, we need to whitelist. I have not added anything for ingress, so I have not whitelisted any ingress rule. So by default, then in that case, all the traffic which will try to reach towards web server will get denied. Okay, so let's create the network policy. Once the network policy is created, let's validate the connectivity. Okay, so here I am connected to kubectl exec IT DB server. I am connected to DB server now. See here, root DB server, inside DB server pod, and from there I'm trying to connect to web server pod on port 80. And you see here connection timed out. This is the same thing before applying this network policy. We tried to connect to when we had connected to DB server and we executed the same command, we saw welcome to DevOps Titan web server. This is a web server. We got that message, right? Now we are getting this connection timed out. So that means our network policy is applied properly and we have achieved what was challenged to us. Okay, so hope you would have liked and learned something from this video. Please subscribe, like this video if it was helpful to you. Click on the bell icon so that you get notified for the next video. And if you have any suggestion, do let me know. Thank you very much. See you again in next video.